Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. Before we get started today, I have some exciting news. An Honorable Profession has been invited to join the Democracy Group. It's a network of podcasts united around the goal of helping listeners understand what's broken in our democracy and how people are working together to fix it. Our goal has always been to restore your faith in government by showing you what's working and the remarkable people leading those efforts. We're so excited to be partnering with the Democracy Group and our peer podcasts in this mission. To learn more, head to democracygroup.org. Ilana Rubel once lived in a car with her mom. They built a life, and she ended up at Georgetown and Harvard Law School. Now she's the minority leader in the Idaho legislature and leading the fight against incredibly extreme laws targeting women and LGBTQ youth. Idaho Democrats are small in number, but they punch well above their weight. They won some big victories this year for schools and families, and under Ilana's leadership have aspirations for turning the political tide in Idaho. Enjoy. Idaho Representative Ilana Rubel, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
We are excited to talk to you today. I think you're our second representative from Idaho we've had on this podcast, and I want to hear a little bit about what's going on in your state.
It's a little rough out here for Team Blue, to be honest, but actually we get further than you would expect for our numbers. We have 11 out of 70 in the House and 7 out of 35 in the Senate. So we're a micro minority, but we really team up with anybody we can team up with. We try to be as savvy as possible in working the media and working communications, making sure we're keeping the public informed, because we actually believe that public opinion out here aligns much more closely with the Democrats, even though there aren't that many of us in office. But we believe that actually, there's a lot of reasons for that. I think people have cultural affiliations. They may not be reading the news too closely, and they're just reflexively voting Republican because it's what their daddy and their granddaddy did. But we want to get the news out that when you really look at issues, most people want to fund public schools. Most people actually support reproductive freedom and public lands, and most people believe in climate change and think we should do something about it. And all these issues. But in terms of the raw numbers, they are not in our favor. And things like LGBTQ rights and women's rights, reproductive rights have been thrown hard under the bus.
And you just finished a legislative session and you were a real fighter on some of those issues. Can you describe what's going on and sort of what you think how it will impact vulnerable populations in your state?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we actually had a win on was we were actually miraculously able to defeat all the voucher schemes, and nobody thought that could be done. Those were coming at us fast and hard, huge amounts of out-of-state money from Betsy DeVos's various PACs and PACs we don't even know who are funding. But there were so many proposals for vouchers, which amazingly we beat back basically on a one-vote margin. That's something that really I think would have hurt poor rural communities where they don't even have private schools, because it would have siphoned money out of public schools. Other things, we were less successful on fending off. There has been a tragic war on the trans community out here with, I think, 40 anti-trans bills brought just in the last few years in Idaho. Some of them we were successful in beating off, but ultimately some really terrible ones went into law. So in terms of vulnerable populations, it's really bad. There's a full-on ban on youth gender confirmation treatment here right now, which, as all of your listeners undoubtedly know, these kids really need these treatment, or they're at really high risk of suicidality and other problems. And right now they have to, either go underground or be refugees in other states. It's not good. Our women's reproductive rights situation is beyond dismal. I think we're worst in America, which I think is going to hurt poor women and women of color the hardest. We have a total ban with absolutely no exception for health problems of any kind. And barely a rape exception that's very hard to invoke. And no exception for non-viable fetuses. So really, some people who have the health and the luxury to be able to go to another state for reproductive care can do so. But for low-income women, it's really a problem in Idaho.
I want to talk about that because that ban is heading to the Supreme Court. You're an attorney. Can you talk about what you see both as the legal prospects and also what do you think the political implications are in the state of this extreme ban?
Yeah, frankly, I was really I guess I shouldn't be shocked knowing who our Attorney General is. He's a very extreme right-wing guy. But to lay a little framework of what this lawsuit is about, this is about an incredibly narrow exception to our total abortion ban in Idaho. This is really about, so there's, federal law, EMTALA, which provides that if you are in a dire medical emergency and you show up at an emergency room, they have to treat you and give you stabilizing treatment. So if you're stabbed, they have to stitch up your wound and make sure you don't bleed to death. Or if you're having a heart attack, they have to do what they can to stabilize you and make sure you don't die. The question at issue in this case is if you show up and you're having a pregnancy-related emergency, you're hemorrhaging or you have sepsis, and the only thing that will save you from a dire health outcome, loss of a limb, loss of a body organ, permanent infertility, something like that, the only treatment that will save you is an abortion. The question is whether federal law preempts so that you can have that abortion when it is the necessary stabilizing medical treatment. Remarkably, our Republican leaders are fighting even that. You would think when they passed their total ban, and then the Department of Justice came in and said, hey, wait a minute, federal law overrides here and says that you have to at least provide emergency abortions where medically necessary. And they said, hell no, not even where there's a medical emergency. Under no circumstance can a woman get this treatment. So once upon a time as a lawyer, I would have said this is an absolute no-brainer. Of course, EMTALA prevails. Federal law beats state law. We all know this from our Schoolhouse Rock or whatever. This should be an easy legal question. But with our current Supreme Court that has shown a proclivity to upend decades and decades of jurisprudence, I am not so sure anymore. I know the law is on our side, but we have a Supreme Court right now that does not necessarily follow the law. They are very ideologically driven, at least the six that were willing to overturn Roe. So I am very nervous where legally I should not have to be nervous, but these folks just want to ban it at all costs, whether it upends the supremacy clause or what.
What's the reaction on the ground? This seems so extreme. And treating women so differently than everybody else that seeks medical care. How's it resonating certainly with your constituents, but then across the state? Well,
my constituency tilts a little more blue than the rest of Idaho, but it's a catastrophe. It's so bad. It exceeds even my worst nightmares of how this ban was going to play out. We've lost half of our OBGYNs across the state, actually more now. Just since session wound up a few weeks ago, 5 more have announced they're leaving the state. We've lost more than half of our high-risk maternity specialists. Our applications have dropped by more than 50% for doctors to come to the state. Women are having to be airlifted now when they have medical complications. They're having to be airlifted to neighboring states. One woman I heard, by the time she got there, her sepsis had advanced so far she needed a hysterectomy. So this law has permanently robbed her of the ability to have children. I can't emphasize enough what a disaster it is. They're telling women in Idaho now they have to get life flight insurance so that they can escape the state if they're in a medical emergency. Word is getting out there to the public, and I'm hoping they wake up and start voting people in who care about women's reproductive rights and freedom, because right now women are full-on second-class citizens in the state. There's no question about it. Anybody else in a medical emergency is guaranteed treatment under EMTALA, but not pregnant women.
Madness. Can we talk a little bit about how Idaho got here? Idaho has a long more libertarian streak, and had Democrats, famous Democrats at the national level for a while. How do we end up in this place with these extreme policies?
It is really, I think, out of step with what the public wants. But I think we have a system in Idaho that's structured in a way such that the popular opinion isn't necessarily reflected in laws. Part of it is we have, as I mentioned, we have this strong reflexive Republican tilt where, I've heard many people say, I don't really read the papers or watch the news. I just show up and vote Republican. So this puts a lot of weight on the Republican primary because too often, whoever emerges with an R beside their name basically is the prohibitive favorite in the general. We're working hard to change this, but this is historically how it's worked. And in this closed Republican primary, you get basically the most extreme 15% of the population on the farthest right fringe who really are the ones who are steering the ship. And it's how it steers behavior. People are thinking, at least some of my Republican colleagues are thinking, well, all I have to do is satisfy the most right-wing 15% of the population and I'll be in office forever. And unfortunately, the Republican platform in Idaho is driven by that far right-wing 15%. And it is shocking. I mean, the Republican platform provides for no exceptions, not even for rape or incest. There's some pretty kooky stuff in there. They want to, of course, repeal all Obamacare, end coverage for pre-existing conditions, kick kids off their parents' insurance, and the federal income tax. That's an interesting one on their platform. So there's some very extreme stuff. But because of how our system is rigged with the closed primaries and this, cultural affiliation problem, this is the fringe that's controlling. But I'm hoping things have gotten bad enough at this point that it's a real wake-up call. And all those reflexive voters are thinking, my doctor's gone. I have nobody to go to when I'm having a baby. It may be time to start reading the papers and look at who's going to, actually reflect what I need and the freedoms that I need. And you made a really good point on the change in culture. We used to be kind of a more live and let live state. It used to be a different flavor of republicanism that was when they meant small government, they meant less in your face running your life. Now it's really weird. By small government, they just mean eliminating all necessary services. So they mean, not funding roads and bridges and schools, but they want really big government when it comes to your private life. They tried to ban drag shows. There are book bans all over, attacks on libraries. They want government that will tell you what books you can read, what clothes you can wear, what health care you can get. They want government doing everything, apparently, except providing vital services.
Crazy. And Idaho has seen really significant population growth, especially during the pandemic and beyond. How is that shaping the electorate, you think, in the coming decade to come?
Yeah, it has not been, the influx hasn't been terribly helpful for my side of the aisle in that Idaho has gotten such a reputation for its nefarious goings on and, Ammon Bundy and right-wing people storming our Capitol and every, people parading around with giant guns everywhere, that it's become a little bit of a magnet for right-wing extremists from around America. All around Orange County and the West Coast, all of the super far right people are flooding into Idaho, which is not great. We're now where the infamous Mark Furman of the OJ trial now lives. Everybody wants to come here of that end of the spectrum. But I think what's happening is as they're coming in, I think the more traditional old school Republicans are thinking, hey, wait a minute, I'm not like that. Things have changed and maybe it's time to reevaluate. So I think this is an opportunity for us to bring some of those middle folks over to be more open to electing Democrats and more progressive candidates.
How are the major employers in Idaho looking at some of these laws? Because it's going to have a huge impact on recruitment and retention of talent. You mentioned it in the medical field already. Where are the opportunities for Democrats and others to partner to try to beat back some of these initiatives?
Yes, you're so right in that things have really changed. When I've been in office for 10 years now, and when I first came in, the whole corporate sector, they just flooded only Republicans with cash. And basically every bit of corporate donation money went into the Republican side. And the only thing that businesses were thinking about at that time, they really had these blinders on and they were just thinking, okay, we're companies. All we need are, blinders on. All we need are corporate tax cuts. cuts and reduced regulation. And as long as someone's willing to deliver those things, that's all we care about. But they've seen, as things have gotten more extreme over time, that actually they have much bigger needs than that. They need a functioning society where their employees and their employees' families are welcome. And it's no matter, it doesn't matter what your corporate tax rate is. If you can't recruit people to the state, and if there aren't decent schools that your employees can send their kids to, or if they feel they can't live here, if they are gay or trans themselves, or if they have a gay or trans family member, it's a real problem for business. Business is starting to pipe up a little bit more on these social issues. I think not quite as much as they need to. They're starting to reach out a little bit more to the Democrats and realizing that actually we are their friends when it comes to building a functioning society that they need to do business in, because they are seeing people leave. And it goes beyond just recruiting healthcare professionals. Companies like Micron in the semiconductor space are routinely either losing employees or failing to recruit needed employees because of our kooky social laws. And people are saying, I'm just sick of the book bans. I'm sick of the attacks on the LGBTQ community. I feel I can't live here because I have a gay kid, or, it's really, it's causing a lot of backlash, I think, to the business community. So they're starting to engage. I think there was a little bit of lag time because this crazy social stuff's been happening for some time, and they've only started really waking up. I think post Dobbs was a real wake up call when they realized, oh wait, our employees won't have doctors to go to. People who are thinking of having kids don't feel it's safe to live in Idaho anymore. It's a problem for businesses in every sector.
Wow. Can you talk a little bit about how you found yourself in this situation, your life story and path to public service? I assume you didn't grow up thinking, wow, I'm going to have to be on the front lines of an epic battle for basic civil rights.
Not remotely. In fact, I had never run for anything. I've never been class secretary or run for a single thing in my life. I came in through a bit of a different path, but I've always been really passionate about politics and about democratic politics in particular. I come from I had a single mom. My mom, actually had to flee to Canada because she had no coverage for her health insurance costs when I was born. So she actually had to load all her stuff into a car and go to Canada, even just to be able to have me and be admitted to a hospital for her birthing purposes. But she was living out of her car. We were super poor. I grew up on the social safety net. Basically, we had help for food and housing. I went to amazing free schools and basically had every opportunity in the world, despite being super poor. So that always made me feel, and at one point in college, I had an epiphany and realized, wow, the reason all this was possible is because of good policies. This actually came out of politics that I had these opportunities. Someone built a society where I had access to healthcare. Someone built a society where, despite being really poor, I could go to great schools. And I felt that I had a strong moral obligation to pay that forward and make sure that those systems remained in place. And I realized that government is where that happens. So a seat opened up in my district 10 years ago when a legislator moved to Seattle halfway through his term. And he was a Democrat, so they had to replace him with a Democrat. And on a kind of crazy lark, I threw my name in the hat, never dreamed that anybody would pick me. I thought, surely there have to be more impressive people with a longer resume of public service. At the time, I was a lawyer, but I did intellectual property litigation, doesn't really have too much to do with state law. But I felt really strongly about a lot of issues. I felt really strongly that we need top-notch public schools and healthcare access. I'm very impassioned on LGBTQ equality and women's rights and all these things. And I do believe that government is where you can move the needle the most in those areas. So I threw my name in the hat. To my amazement, they actually picked me. But then I had to figure out how to run. Had no idea how to do that. That was a really overwhelming thing to figure out, because that's actually a separate job in itself, how to be a candidate, which is a little different from how to be a legislator. You got to figure out, how do you make a logo? How do you make a website? How are you supposed to knock on strangers' doors? How do you ask for money for your campaign? But there were some great training programs that I went to them all and, worked hard at figuring out how to be a candidate. And I think within a couple months, I had that figured out. And thankfully, I've been reelected ever since.
And how have you found it? I mean, let me just say, you went to Georgetown, you went to Harvard Law School. You had a tremendous background in understanding institutions, but often the practice is very different than what you read in books. What's been the surprising, both positive and potentially negative thing you found about during that time in elected office?
Yeah, it was quite shocking. Some of the things that I've seen go down here in the Idaho legislature were pretty remarkable, and things that I would never have dreamed possible before I got there. Things like, they passed a resolution calling for the impeachment of any judge that rules in favor of same-sex marriage. I mean, some wacky things happened that kind of blew my mind. But I have found that you can actually make a pretty big impact, even as part of a tiny minority. I mean, I have 17% of the seats. I'm the House Democratic leader, and my caucus is 17% of the House. And so, some people warned, oh, you'll never be able to get a bill passed. You'll never be able to do anything in there with such a small minority. You actually really can do a lot. I think I have to work a lot harder than my Republican colleagues, but some very meaningful things. I was able to get dental care added to Medicaid. I was able to sponsor meaningful increases in teacher pay. I got hearing aids covered for deaf kids. As I mentioned, we were able to form a coalition with some more moderate Republicans to basically save our public schools and fight off voucher schemes. We saved Medicaid expansion. We've done some pretty remarkable things. We got expanded contraception coverage passed this year. The Democrats have spearheaded some very impactful things and actually managed to get them across the finish line. So we have made our mark against all odds, but we found that, with reason and logic, and if you're willing to work hard enough, and you got to work the public, we have to work very hard to get our message out and write op-eds and, go on radio shows, do everything we can to actually reach the public, because sometimes we need them to help us move the needle and flood the State House with calls and emails. But we have really made progress on some really important issues. And I'm hopeful that maybe with a ballot initiative, we might actually get some rights back in the next couple of years. We shall see. That's the dream right now.
I like that dream, and I wish you well. In terms of messaging, reaching out, I mean, as you said, there are people who have generational affiliation with the Republican Party. So how do you talk to them, make them feel good about supporting a candidate, supporting a cause, engaging, and maybe moving your state to the middle?
Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of door knocking because I found with personal face-to-face conversations, it's a lot easier to convince them when they meet me and I explain what I'm all about and what bills I've worked on. There aren't a lot of people that are really horrified by the idea of deaf kids having access to hearing aids or some of the things that we work on. So when they actually meet me and see I don't have horns and that I'm on their side and I'm a person trying to make our society a good place, they're willing to listen in a personal setting. And sometimes that can help snap them out of the right-wing bubble where they just tell everybody we're baby murdering demons all the time. So I think having that person-to-person contact is helpful. But I think also we frame our messaging in terms of, this is a different Republican Party. This is not your dad's Republican Party. These are not Eisenhower. Like Ronald Reagan, I don't think could win a precinct captain race in Idaho right now. I think he would be considered far too moderate to be in line with this. So I think part of this is waking people up to the reality of today's Republican Party in Idaho and say, hey, I get that your whole family may have been Republican and that you may have considered yourself Republican. I get that. Maybe once upon a time, they had reasonable positions, but you got to pay attention to what they're actually doing, what these Republican politicians are actually doing now. They are not working for you right now. They are working for, out of state ideologues that are pumping money into schemes that will not help the average person at all.
What's your advice to somebody who may be sitting in a small blue dot in a larger red state about how best they can engage and make a difference through politics?
Well, that is us. We are a blue dot in a red state out here. And don't give up. You can, especially these legislative races, often these races are decided on very narrow margins and you can buck the odds. I mean, we have people that are in districts where that Trump won by 20 points, where we have a Democratic legislator in there. People will split their tickets. They will hear you out if they get to know you as a person. It's a lot of work, but it is doable. And you can win at this level, even in very red places, with, again, that person-to-person contact, that telling your story door to door or, on the phone or any way that you can. And once you get in there, you can make really remarkable impact, even in very red states. I've passed as many bills as anybody in the building, despite being part of a 17% minority in our legislature. In fact, I'm agonizing now. I've got my palm card. I have more bills than will fit on my palm card. I want to list them all out and brag about them, but there are too many. So we are really getting things done as part of our small minority. And we are winning in places that people, don't think a Democrat could win in. So if you just put your shoulder to the wheel, knock those doors, have those conversations. Don't panic when you get to a house that has a Trump sign on it. Those people might still vote for you. I have a colleague in a very red district who loves taking pictures of his own yard sign beside Trump signs in people's yards. Surprising things can happen. And I think the biggest enemy that we have is a feeling of hopelessness. It's that never trying in the first place because everybody thinks, oh, it's so red, there's no point. If you can overcome that feeling of hopelessness and dive in, it is not in fact hopeless. You can do remarkable things when you actually run and run hard. Sometimes it takes more than one time. A number of our people had to run a couple times to flip a seat, but they got in there and they did amazing things once they got in there. So don't let the despair take over. It's a trap.
And I imagine that it's that mindset that got you elected minority leader to try to coordinate your colleagues and present a united front. Can you talk a little bit about what you see in that role and how you hope to make an impact in addition to serving your constituents, but now trying to represent your caucus across statewide?
Yes, the leader is a whole other layer. As I mentioned, there were kind of two jobs that I signed on to when I became a legislator. There was being a legislator, and then there was being a candidate, which are kind of different things. You can be very good at one and bad at the other. But now leader is a whole other ball of wax, because I see my job now is to make my caucus succeed, to expand my caucus, to get as many more of us in there as possible. So that's now a much bigger deal to me. Actually, I was fortunate in that redistricting made my district bluer, so I don't have to panic quite as much about my own seats. So now I can panic about everybody else's seats and raise money for them and help guide their campaigns. But I'm also the spokesperson. So when anything happens and they want to know what the Democrats think about this, I get the call from the media. So I have to be careful in my messaging that, I could probably say pretty aggressively progressive things and be okay in my district, but I have to be really careful in couching it so that I'm not going to, make my colleagues in Pocatello or in these, much redder districts get in trouble. But I think we always just have to come across as the most reasonable person in the room, and I think we are. But we just have to always frame that messaging of hey, let's stay on target. Let's do useful things for people. Let's make sure we have roads and bridges that aren't falling down, and schools that aren't collapsing, and teachers that are decently paid enough that they'll stay in the state, and medical care, and make sure that we have reproductive freedom so people don't want to flee and not have any doctors here. Let's do the really common sense stuff that will actually make people's lives better. Does terrorizing trans kids make anybody's lives better? It does not. Does terrorizing librarians make anybody's lives better? It does not. All these crazy right-wing social issue rabbit holes the other side likes to go down only make people's lives worse in the end. And so I think that really mainstream bread and butter messaging is what we stick to. And I hope it's going to get us some gains this year. We shall see.
Yeah, I think that's my next question is, how are things looking politically in Idaho? I don't expect it to be a blue state anytime soon, but are you seeing any changes on the ground that excite you? How is the candidate recruitment coming as well?
Yeah, our candidate recruitment is amazing. Amazing. We had like 36 candidates running statewide for all the legislative seats. This year we have 87. So it's almost 3 times as many. We have at least one Democrat running in every district now, which is amazing. We actually hadn't had that in decades. So we are firing on all cylinders. We're seeing what I call a time of consequences now. When I started in the legislature would pass all these kooky right-wing things, but they wouldn't really become reality because we had a Supreme Court that would say, yeah, that's totally illegal. You can't do that. Or the federal government would rein it in, or, at some point they do these nutty things, but a grown-up in the room further down the process would stop it from becoming reality. Post-Dobbs, things are very, very different. And with the possible specter of another Trump administration on the horizon, things are very different indeed. Now, when the legislature does crazy things, it's real. These things really happen. There is nobody to save us from ourselves at this point. And I think people have started realizing that. And with the loss of half our state's doctors, it was a real wake-up call that nobody else is coming to save us. We are the ones we've been waiting for, as Obama says. And we need people. We have got to make sure we have a responsible state legislature, because there is no other further backstop down the process and down the road. So I think a lot of people have realized that and have stepped up. And I think they've realized that it's not like there's some magical person who's the right person for state legislature. It can be anybody. And we've had people in there. We had a mountain guide. We have school teachers. We have firefighters. I have a union electrician on my caucus who, as soon as he leaves the legislature, he slaps on his hard hat and heads to a work site. I mean, this is a job that can be anybody. There doesn't need to be some amazing person with a mile-long resume of public positions on there. It could be absolutely anybody who cares about their community and is willing to do the work.
I feel like they just need you to knock on every door in Idaho and the whole state would change. I love the optimism and the reasonableness and the, taking these, what people feel like are complex issues and breaking it down to, is it making your life better? And chances are, if you're engaging in restricting other people's rights and lives, it's not. So go with us. I love that pitch.
Yes, exactly. You're not going to be any better able to afford your rent or your grocery bill if they're terrorizing transgender kids out of the state. That is just not helpful.
Well, I want to thank you. I was when we started the conversation, it was shocking how extreme the limit on pregnant women is becoming your state. I have a little more optimism now that the populace will move to the middle and pull the legislature and legislation with them. And I think it's because you're there, and we love having you in the New Deal, and we love having you in the legislature and now leading the caucus.
Well, thank you. And thank you, New Deal, for all the wonderful ways you bring us together and bring great ideas forward.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.